I wonder if I offered you what was in this bucket, whether you would receive it, whether you would take it gratefully, whether you'd be a little bit skeptical, whether you'd kind of, reluctantly take it. It's a free gift. There's no strings attached, and I promise you it's pretty cool. And well, how about I'll show it to you first before you make up your mind, because I'm not a psychopath, okay? So this is it, and I know what you're thinking, okay? Probably not something I would have gotten myself, okay? And I can kind of tell it's unsettling a lot of you, so I'm gonna give you a minute to think about what you think that this might be. And in the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. And this story comes to us from John chapter 4. And in John chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Galilee. And in order to get to Galilee, they have to travel through a place called Samaria. And when they're in Samaria, they stop to rest, and Jesus' disciples go on ahead to get some food in town, and Jesus hangs back at a place called Jacob's Well. And so he's resting there, and at about noon, a woman from Samaria comes to draw water. And Jesus approaches this woman, and he asks her for a drink. And this is a bit of a strange request, because Jesus was a Jewish man and she was a Samaritan woman, and the two cultures, they just didn't mix. They didn't like each other. A lot of them hated each other. There was hundreds of years of history of bad blood between the two, and so this was a very strange request. And she even says to him, "How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink?" And then Jesus kind of turns the tables around, and he says, "If you only knew who I was, you would ask me for a drink, and I would give you living water." This woman's like, "Who the heck is this weirdo? I just want to get a drink and get out of here." And she even says, you don't even have a cup to draw water with. What are you going to give it to me with?" And Jesus kind of continues, and he says, "Anyone who drinks from the water from this well will be thirsty again. But anybody who drinks from the water that I give them will never thirst again. In fact, anybody who drinks from the water that I give them will have within them a well springing up to eternal life." And this woman's like, "Okay, well, why don't you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm sick of being thirsty all the time, and I'm like lugging this pot or whatever all the way to the well and back in the middle of the day. So yeah, show me what you got." And it's at this point where Jesus starts to actually reveal himself to her. You see, he's not just some random stranger at a well. He knows exactly who this woman is, and he knows that she's in trouble. Her life is a complete mess, and this is her hope staring at her right in the face, and she has no idea who he is. And so he makes a request. He says, "Why don't you go get your husband in town and bring him back?" And so she kind of looks at the ground sheepishly, and she kind of says, "Well, I don't really have a husband per se right now." And Jesus looks at her and he says, "I know. In fact, I know that you've had 5 husbands, and the guy that you're with right now, you're just kind of messing around with him. You don't have any intentions for the future." And this lady's like, "How do you know so much about my life? Are you some kind of prophet?" And they start talking, and Jesus reveals exactly what it is that he's come to her to talk about. He promises her hope, he promises her life, and in spite of all of the mess that she's dealing with. And it says that her life is instantly changed, so much so that she runs into town and she tells all of the townspeople about this man that she's met, who claims to be the one that God has sent to redeem his people. And it says that a lot of the people in the village actually come to believe because of her testimony, despite all of their thoughts about her and her life. There's a couple of points that are mentioned in this story that give us a vivid example of what her life was truly like. You see, this woman wasn't like everyone else. In fact, she was an outcast. And the thing that kind of tips us off the most is the time of day at which this story takes place. If you've ever lived in the Middle East, if you've ever even done hard labor in the middle of summer, you know that the worst time to be doing any kind of physical labor is in the middle of the day. That's when the sun is at one of its hottest points. And so, let alone carrying a big jug of water for miles on end in the middle of the desert, it's not ideal. And in fact, the people of the time knew that, and it was the role of the woman to go and get the water each day, and they'd choose to do so in the cool of the morning so that the sun wasn't at its hottest point. And not only that, but they'd actually choose to go in groups. Women do everything in groups. It's a tradition that carries on to this day. But they'd go in groups just for protection, but also the companionship and the pleasure of each other's company. But there's two things that we notice when we meet this woman is, number one, the sun is at its hottest point, and number two is that she's incredibly alone. And as Jesus begins his conversation with her, it becomes very clear to us as to why. You see, this woman's story, the story of her life had been one of loneliness, of rejection, of heartache. She's sought all of the fulfillment of all of her desires in the wrong company and the wrong relationships. And so with every man that she meets, she makes mistake after mistake after mistake just to try and fill these empty voids in her life. And so by the time that Jesus meets her, her reputation among the townspeople is that she's dirty, that she's used, that she's broken. I asked you at the beginning what you thought this might be. And to tell you the truth, it is a stuffed animal. Well, it was. I mean, it still is, but, it's actually a dog. I don't know if you can kind of see that.
He's so fluffy, I'm gonna die.
And this dog was created with a purpose. And that purpose was to be dang cute. And it was. It's got big blue eyes, it's got big ears, it's got soft fur, it's got a tail even sort of somewhere around here. But at some point along the way, this dog got dirty. At some point it was dropped, it was dragged, maybe it was left outside. And with every speck of mud that latched itself onto it, it became more and more unrecognizable. So much so to the point that it became undesirable. It started to reek, it started to just be covered in filth, to the point where its intended purpose, which is to bring happiness to a child somewhere, or a grown man in this case, you offer this to a kid and they'd probably throw it away. Like, people run away from this. This is terrifying. And it smells awful. And yet, I can't help but wonder if this is how the woman at the well felt. Maybe she didn't feel like this on the outside, she didn't look like this on the outside, but on the inside, this is very much what she related to. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 17 says, "If anyone belongs to Jesus, they are a new creation. Their old life passes away and he makes for them a new one." You see, it wasn't a mistake that Jesus met this woman in this way. It wasn't by chance. In fact, he sought her out as she sat in her mess to offer her hope. He tells her that the water that he offers her would make it so that she would never thirst again. In other words, he would be the one to be able to satisfy her every need as she's trying to fill all of these voids in her life with all of this cheap company. See, day after day, she would come back to this well anytime that she was thirsty. And just in the same way, anytime that she felt lonely or rejected or worthless, she would try and make herself feel better by all of these broken relationships that she's built. But the hope that Jesus offered her was that her life wasn't wasted. She wasn't garbage. Her mistakes were fixable. And in fact, if she only came to him, that he would be the one to remind her the truth about who she truly was, about who she was specifically designed by God to be. And not only that, but he would transform her into a new creation. He would remove all of the shame and the guilt that caused her to be so unrecognizable to all of her friends and family and the people in the village, but most importantly, to her. Maybe you've made mistakes in your life that cause you to feel like this, that you relate to this woman in some small way. Things that have happened to you in your past, things that you've done that you regret, that you wish you could take back. But it just seems like everything piles on, and it's to the point where you kind of ask yourself, who could possibly want this? The beautiful thing is that the hope Jesus offers is that our mistakes don't define who we are. He wants to remove all of the filth and show you your potential in light of his love and his mercy and his grace towards you. And the best part is that we don't have to wait till we're presentable or we're cleaned up or in any kind of better state to approach him. We can come exactly as we are, and he wants us to come exactly how we are. And when we finally do come to him, he's so ready to jump into the mud with us. And not just jump into the mud with us, but pull us out so that he can clean us off. Because the hope that he's offering to us is that he gives us a new life, free from all of the shame, all of the guilt, all of the things that we've done in our past. And he redefines who we are as members of his family based off of nothing but his love and his grace for us. He's ready to offer us that new life freely. And he wipes our slate completely clean, and he promises to meet our every need so we don't have to run to all of these cheap imitations to fill the voids inside of us. And all he's looking for us to do is to come to him, because his love for us never runs dry.